Why Trump's second term could be even more extreme than his first. Source: Charlie Savage, Jonathan Swan, and Maggie Haberman. Charlie Savage has been a journalist for more than 2 decades. He specializes in national security and legal policy. Jonathan Swan is a political correspondent, covering the 2024 presidential election and Donald Trump's campaign. Maggie Haberman is a senior political correspondent, and the author of Confidence Man: The Making of Donald Trump and the Breaking of America. She was part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2018 for reporting on President Trump's advisors and their ties to Russia. Donald Trump has long displayed authoritarian instincts, but his policies have become more complex, while the mechanisms to check him have weakened. As he runs for re-election facing 4 criminal charges, Trump appears to have become angry, desperate, and more dangerous to American democracy than his first term. But the real problem has been there for decades. He has been glorifying political violence and praising dictators for decades. As a presidential candidate in July 2016, Trump praised Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein as very good at killing terrorists. A few months after taking office, he told Philippine hardliner Rodrigo Duterte that Duterte's brutal campaign, which has seen thousands of extrajudicial killings in the name of fighting drugs, was a phenomenal job. And during his 4 years in the Oval Office, Trump has repeatedly crossed the line and violated democratic norms. What's different about Trump's second administration is not his personality, but his surroundings. The forces that somewhat restrained Trump's authoritarian tendencies in his first term: staffers who saw their job as containing him, some Republicans willing to criticize or oppose him at times, a partisan balanced Supreme Court that would occasionally rule against him will all be weakened. As a result, the more extreme policy plans and ideas that Trump and his advisors are preparing for a second term are more likely to come to fruition. An extreme agenda. To be sure, some of the goals Trump and his allies are planning are simply standard responses for any Republican president. For example, Trump would likely undo many of President Biden's policies to curb carbon emissions and accelerate the transition to electric vehicles. Reversing these rules and policies would significantly weaken environmental protections, but most of the changes reflect a long-standing conservative skepticism about environmental regulations. The rest of Trump's agenda, however, is unusual. No previous president has toyed with withdrawing from NATO, America's military alliance with Western democracies. He has said he will fundamentally reassess the purpose of NATO and the mission of NATO in his second term. He has also said he would order the military to attack drug cartels in Mexico, which would violate international law unless the Mexican government agrees. But it likely won't. He would also use the military on U.S. soil. While using the military to enforce domestic law is generally illegal, the Insurrection Act allows for exceptions. After some protests against police brutality in 2020 turned violent, Trump drafted an executive order authorizing the use of the military to quell protesters in Washington, D.C., but ultimately did not sign it. This year, he hinted at a rally in Iowa that he intended to unilaterally send troops to Democratic-run cities to enforce public order in general. You look at any Democrat-run state, they're not what they used to be, they're not working, Trump told the crowd, calling cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco hotbeds of crime. We can't have that anymore. That's one of the things I'm going to do because people say the president has nothing to do with it, they have to be asked by the governor or the mayor, but next time, I'm not going to wait. Trump's plans to purge undocumented immigrants include sweeping raids, massive detention camps, deportations of millions of people each year, ending asylum, trying to end birthright citizenship for children born on U.S. soil to undocumented immigrants, and invoking the Insurrection Act to allow the military to take over immigration enforcement near the southern border. Trump will try to expand presidential power in myriad ways, focusing on greater power to the executive branch in the White House, the end of the independence of agencies Congress created to operate outside the president's control, and the erosion of civil service protections so that tens of thousands of government employees can be easily fired and replaced. Above all, Trump's vow to use the Justice Department to exact revenge on his enemies is a flagrant challenge to democratic values. He tried to get prosecutors to go after his enemies while in office, and Trump's vow to end the post-Watergate norm of independent investigations outside the political control of the White House. For all these efforts, Trump will be aided in his second term by a well-funded think tank. In 2016, many conservative think tanks remained bastions of George W. Bush-style republicanism. But new organizations led by Trump administration veterans have emerged, and the prominent Heritage Foundation has quickly adapted to Trumpism. One coalition is drafting America First-style policy plans, dubbed Project 2025. The Trump campaign has praised the effort, but says only plans released by him or his campaign are official. While some of the proposals developed under Project 2025 would advance the long-standing goals of top Republican donors, such as reducing corporate regulation, others are more aligned with Trump's personal interests. The Center for American Renewal, for example, published a paper titled "The U.S. Department of Justice is Not Independent." The article was written by Jeffrey Clark, who Trump nearly tapped as acting attorney general to help him overturn the 2020 election results, and Clark is now facing criminal charges in Georgia for his involvement in that effort. When asked for comment, a Trump spokesperson did not respond specifically, instead criticizing the New York Times and saying Trump has always been tough on criminals. Trump has flouted democratic norms since his 2016 campaign. He blamed his loss in the Iowa caucuses on fraud, and suggested that he would only consider the results of the general election legitimate if he won. He has threatened to jail Hillary Clinton, painted Mexican immigrants as rapists, and promised to ban Muslims from entering the United States. He also offered to pay the legal bills of any supporters who beat up protesters at his rallies, and incited hatred against reporters covering his events. While in office, Trump refused to divest from his businesses, and people seeking his favor booked expensive suites at his hotels. Despite anti-nepotism laws, he gave his daughter and son-in-law White House jobs. He also used his emergency powers to spend more on the border wall than Congress had authorized. His lawyers unsuccessfully sought a pardon for his campaign chairman, whom Trump praised for not betraying him when prosecutors tried to persuade him to cooperate as a witness in the Russia investigation. Trump ultimately pardoned him. Trump has pressured the Justice Department to prosecute his opponents. The Justice Department has opened several criminal investigations, from the surveillance of former Secretary of State John Kerry and former FBI Director James B. Comey Jr. to Special Counsel John Durham's efforts to find grounds to charge Obama-era national security officials or Hillary Clinton with crimes related to the origins of the Russia investigation. But prosecutors ultimately decided not to bring charges, infuriating Trump. Trump also failed in two of those efforts that led to his impeachment. He tried to force Ukraine to open a criminal investigation into Biden by withholding military aid, but Ukraine refused to cooperate. He also sought to overturn his 2020 election loss and instigated a riot at the Capitol, but Vice President Mike Pence and a majority in Congress rejected his efforts to stay in power. There is reason to believe that many of the obstacles and barriers that constrained Trump in his first term will be gone in his second. Some of the goals Trump sought to achieve were thwarted by the incompetence and chaos of his early administration. But after 4 years, those who stayed with him have learned to wield power more effectively. For example, after the courts blocked his poorly drafted travel ban, Trump's team developed a version that the Supreme Court allowed to take effect. Trump's 4 years in office have produced a Republican-majority Supreme Court that will now likely side with the pro-Trump administration. He has lost several cases, including a 5-4 ruling in June 2020 that blocked him from ending a program that barred the deportation of undocumented people who came to the United States as children and grew up as Americans. Republicans in Congress have often been Trump's partners and enablers, working with him to appoint Supreme Court justices and cut corporate taxes, but rarely providing oversight of the president. But some key Republicans in Congress have occasionally denounced Trump's rhetoric or challenged his more extreme proposals. In 2017, Senator Bob Corker criticized Trump for recklessly threatening North Korea on Twitter, while Senator John McCain cast the decisive vote to stop Trump from repealing a universal health insurance law without a replacement. Republicans in Congress are more likely to be compliant with Trump if he wins a second term. The party has become more accommodating to him and even enthusiastic about his willingness to cross the line. And Trump has undermined, threatened to force into submission, or fired many leading Republican lawmakers who have taken independent positions and sometimes been willing to take a stand against him. McCain, the 2008 Republican presidential nominee, died in 2018. Former Representative Liz Cheney, who voted to impeach Trump for inciting the January 6, 2021, riot and helped lead the committee investigating it, lost her seat to a pro-Trump primary challenger. Senator Mitt Romney, the 2012 Republican presidential nominee and the only Republican senator to vote to convict Trump in his first impeachment trial, is retiring. Fears of violence from Trump supporters have also helped Trump tighten his grip. In their recent books, Romney and Cheney both said that some unnamed Republican colleagues said they wanted to vote against Trump in the impeachment proceedings over the January 6 incident but did not do so out of concern for their own safety and that of their families. Personnel is policy. Perhaps the most important counterweight to Trump's presidency has been the resistance within the administration to some of his more extreme demands. Since then, a series of senior officials in his administration have warned that Trump is unfit to be president, including former White House Chief of Staff John F. Kelly, former Defense Secretaries Jim Mattis and Mark T. Esper, former National Security Advisor John R. Bolton, former Attorney General William P. Barr, and many others. For his part, Trump has criticized all of these people as weak, stupid, and disloyal. He has privately told those close to him that his biggest mistake involved the people he appointed, specifically his choice for Attorney General. Advisors who are sticking with him are confident that if he wins a new term, no official will try to thwart his agenda. In addition to developing policy papers, a coalition of think tanks run by people with ties to Trump has built a database of thousands of potential vetted recruits to hand to a transition team if Trump wins. Similar efforts are underway by former senior Trump administration officials to prepare the government to provide lawyers who can find ways to support the White House's radical ideas rather than legally block them. Such staffing efforts stem from a shift in Trump's final year in office. In 2020, he replaced advisors who dared to stand in his way, and appointed a young aide, John McEntee, to root out officials deemed insufficiently loyal. Depending on how the Senate election process plays out, appointing particularly controversial nominees to key positions could be a challenge. But another Trump norm-breaking practice is his abuse of presidential power to temporarily fill vacancies with acting leaders for Senate-confirmed positions. In 2020, for example, Trump appointed Richard Grenell, a hawkish ally and former ambassador to Germany, as acting director of national intelligence. Two former intelligence chiefs angered him by defending the argument that Russia had covertly tried to help his 2016 campaign, and by informing Democratic leaders that they would do so again in 2020. Instead, Grenell won Trump's praise by using his position to declassify sensitive documents that Republicans would use to portray the Russia investigation as suspect. Richard Grenell was appointed by Trump as acting director of national intelligence, one of the most should have waited for Senate confirmation. Copyright Pete Moravec / New York Times. After Trump left office, there were several proposals to codify the democratic norms he violated. Ideas included tightening limits on the president's emergency powers, requiring disclosure of his taxes, strengthening a constitutional ban on payoffs, and making it harder to abuse the president's pardon power and authority over prosecutors. In December 2021, when Democrats still controlled the House, they passed several such proposals in the Protecting American Democracy Act. Every Republican but one Representative Adam Kinzinger, who retired after voting to impeach Trump following the January 6 riot, voted against the bill. It later died in the Senate. The debate in the House was largely based on a premise that diminished the urgency of the issue: Trump had left office. Democrats argued that the reforms were for future presidents, while Republicans saw them as an unnecessary attack on Trump. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is no longer president, said Representative Rick Crawford, a Republican from Arkansas. It's time to stop living in the past.